So thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here today. So last year, we had to replace the boiler in my house. My family and I live in a part of Boston called Jamaica Plain, and we have a house built in 1874, a nice, drafty old Victorian. So over the past 20 years, we've done our bit. We've blown in insulation. We've changed our light bulbs. We installed storm windows. Last year, it was the boiler's turn. We have a steam system powered by natural gas. So we did some research. I consulted with our heating contractor, and we identified the appropriate, more efficient boiler. Of course, one of the things that makes the new boilers more efficient is that it has electronic ignition. The old boiler had a pilot light that burned all the time, though I did make a point of turning it down in the summer. Even though it did burn all the time, the pilot light was also attached to a thermopile, and a thermopile is a device, as most of you probably know, that creates electricity from heat. The electricity produced by the thermopile was enough to power the house's thermostat and the switches on the boiler, which meant that even during a power blackout during the winter, the system still had heat, and we could stay in our house. As many of you also know, climate preparedness, climate resilience, climate adaptation, all these terms will work, is becoming a much more visible concern in the past few years. And in my job and in the city of Boston, we've actually been thinking about it quite a long time. So I asked the heating contractor whether the new boiler, the new more efficient boiler, would come with, say, a backup battery that could run the boiler during a power outage, or whether there was a manual override so that I could manually light the boiler during a blackout. The answer to both these questions was no. Okay, so I turned around to him and said, the hell with energy efficiency. Give me a boiler with a pilot light. I'd rather have that. I'd rather be warm in summer, during a winter blackout, and not have to go to a emergency shelter in the event of an emergency. Well, he then told me that the Commonwealth of Massachusetts no longer allows pilot lights in new boilers, that electronic ignition is mandatory, and this is probably for safety reasons, with which I am fully sympathetic. Okay, we got the new boiler, we have the benefit of its efficiencies, but it's at the cost of my family being less prepared for winter storms. Now, I'm not making an argument against energy efficiency, but it is important to remember that energy efficiency is not the only goal. So in my job in the city of Boston, I oversee the development and implementation of our climate action plan. We had our first action plan in 2007. We updated it after a year-long community process in 2011. That action plan includes a whole set of recommendations about making Boston less vulnerable to the projected effects of climate change in Boston: sea level rise, coastal flooding, heat waves, more intense storms. And it also set goals for reducing Boston's greenhouse gas emissions 25% by 2020 and 80% by 2050. So how are we doing so far? This graph shows several measures for the city of Boston, all indexed to start at 1 in 2005, so you can compare the relative changes. Let's start with looking at what most people in Boston would consider the really good news. Population and employment in Boston are up about 7% from 2005 to 2012. Boston is growing faster than the state as a whole. And this is good news for several reasons, in particular because it's good for the greenhouse gas emissions of the region. Per capita emissions of greenhouse gases by residents and per capita job emissions are lower in Boston. Living in Boston is more efficient. Therefore, growth in Boston is best for the region. Next, take a look at the total energy line. This combines our emissions for electricity, natural gas, and diesel fuel. It does not include our transportation fuels. It's flat. I wouldn't make there's this big bump up in 2010, which I wouldn't make too much of. I think there was something funny going on in the heating oil numbers. And whether that extra step down in 2012 is indicative of a really positive trend in reducing our overall energy use, I'd like to wait to see what the 2013 number is. But flat is good, because population and jobs are going up in Boston. It means that, again, per capita emissions are going down at a very good rate. The problem is that the atmosphere doesn't care about efficiency in terms of how we look at it from a climate perspective. It doesn't care about the amount of the energy use per resident, per job, per dollar of GDP. It cares about totals. And furthermore, it doesn't care about the total energy use. It cares about total greenhouse gas emissions. Well, fortunately, the news here is very good for reasons that several other people have discussed. Greenhouse gas emissions are down about 16% since 2005. And if you draw a straight line, we're well on our way to where we seem to be on the path to meeting our 2020 goals. And as several people have pointed out, I think this graph might be a little hard to see, the major reason is fuel switching. We're gotten rid of much of the coal and oil in our production of electricity and steam in Boston and in the Northeast. And there's furthermore been a lot of switching from heating oil to natural gas in the direct heating of homes, which is why the natural gas number is going up. And that's been the result of a lot of hard work by a lot of people. So we know how we're doing. I want to go back and take a look at what we expected to happen in 2011. When we put together our climate action plan in 2011 and set the 25% goal, we looked at 21 different strategies and strategy areas that could contribute to reducing our greenhouse gas emissions. You don't need to really focus on the details here. Only point out that the green and greenish yellow segments are related to building energy use. The blue segments are related to transportation, and the yellow and orange ones are for solid waste and for behavior change. The overall size of those color areas roughly correspond to the contributions of those sectors to our total greenhouse gas emissions. So, for example, buildings account for about 70% of greenhouse gas emissions in the city of Boston. Only 1/5 of that pie pertains to fuel switching. So we did not foresee, obviously, the boom in natural gas that actually has accounted so far for about 4/5 of the greenhouse gas reductions that we've actually achieved. But about 3/4 of that pie relates to energy efficiency. And furthermore, about half of the pie refers to voluntary actions. Even though we are changing some of the rules and regulations in Boston, for example, the energy reporting ordinance that we have in Boston, many of you may be familiar with, even that ordinance only requires building owners to be informed about energy efficiency opportunities. It does not require them to actually take action. But when we think about encouraging voluntary action, we feel very optimistic in Boston about the way forward. And this is for several reasons. First of all, we have very strong leadership. Our former mayor, Tom Menino, was a consistent and clear advocate about energy efficiency and climate action. And I'm very glad to tell you that our new mayor, Marty Walsh, has continued that commitment and is urging us to go forward. Second of all, we have very strong support in the Business and Institutional Committee. We have a group in Boston called the Green Ribbon Commission that came together about 3 years ago to support the city's climate action plan and set an example for energy efficiency and greenhouse gas reductions. The members of the Green Ribbon Commission are not only showing leadership in reducing their own energy use and emissions, but they're organizing their sectors to collectively address energy efficiency and greenhouse gas emissions. Third, we have a very active network of community supporters and grassroots organizations. Mayor Walsh has told us that during the recent campaign, the campaign last summer, and in the post-election transition period, the two areas that most consistently brought out large numbers of people from the community to comment are the arts in Boston and environment issues, including climate change. Boom, what am I apologize for that. I'm not sure what I keep hitting. Given the active network that we have, we need to use a variety of messages. And we've talked about messages in some of the earlier sessions. Obviously, we have the climate message, and we get that out very clearly. I don't need to convince this audience about the strong financial case that can be made for energy efficiency. And we make that very strongly to all groups that we talk with. Another important part is economic growth. We have a growing number of examples of businesses, both large and small, both traditional businesses that are doing the hands-on work of putting in insulation and changing out boilers and light bulbs and electrical equipment, and new startup companies that are providing very exciting opportunities for Boston and creating jobs. Community advocates, many community advocates tell us that the job story is by far the most important story in really gaining and maintaining community support for climate action. Efficiency is also important for climate preparedness and resilience. Despite the story about my boiler, energy efficiency can contribute greatly to climate resilience. A well-insulated building will be habitable longer in the summer and in the winter. A energy efficient building will add less to the strain of on the electric grid during a heat wave. So I want to impose one more job on all of us working on energy efficiency, and that is to incorporate climate preparedness as part of the energy efficiency work that we do. When we replace a boiler, for example, are we putting it in a place where it is less likely to be flooded during a coastal storm, if it's in a floodplain or in an area that could be in a floodplain 50 years from now? Are there innovations that we can make in the type of boilers that we design so that they aren't as vulnerable to power blackouts as I have to deal with? Don't overlook the effect that efficiency can have on public health and air quality. We know there's a story there about reducing the burning of fossil fuels. We are improving our air quality, and many communities in Boston in particular, I know, are very sensitive to air quality issues. Asthma is a very big problem, and people want to know what they can do about it. As a final example, I want to tell you about my energy efficiency fantasy. I guess I'm not going to be able to show you my energy. Oh, there we go, okay. So Boston, like many cities across the country, has been changing out its streetlights for LEDs. These streetlights are not only more efficient in themselves, but they much more effectively direct the light that they produce downward towards the street rather than up into the sky. Another program that we're working on in Boston in partnership with Mass Audubon and several other organizations is called Lights Out, and the idea is to get owners of large office buildings to turn out the lights at night during the bird migration system so that the birds don't lose their way. So I imagine all of these programs increasing to expand, and energy efficiency and light pollution, and that all levels of light pollution being reduced throughout the city, so that in a few years from now, I can look up from my backyard in Boston and see the Milky Way. So, if you have an energy fantasy, I welcome you to come and tell me about it. If you live in Boston, or even if you don't live in Boston, I invite you to participate in the update of our Climate Action Plan, which includes reviewing our energy efficiency programs this year. The public process has started, and you can join an online discussion at engage.greennovateboston.org, and perhaps we'll start an energy efficiency fantasy page there. So thank you very much, and I look forward to your comments and ideas.